In this lesson, the last lesson of the unit, we're going to focus specifically on the plight of the farmers in the Great Plains. This picture shows us two issues that farmers had to deal with on the plains. The railroads. Farmers needed the railroads to ship their crops back to eastern markets, and the grain silos, which the farmers needed to store their crops, largely corn and wheat crops. The problems that the farmers faced was that both the railroad companies and the grain elevator storage companies were charging very high prices to farmers, prices that were often so high that farmers were unable to make a profit. This political cartoon shows that the farmers laying underneath the railroad track should be a little bit more concerned about the railroad than they seemed to be. And the farmer is standing there warning the other farmers about the train. If we take a look at the words on the train, consolidation train, extortion, bribery, this gives us an indication that the cartoonist that drew the cartoon was not a fan of the railroads. We already know that the railroads were overcharging the farmers, and this is going to lead the farmers to take action. I've already indicated to you that farmers faced many problems, and we really discussed number two for the most part. Let's talk about number one, falling prices and rising debt. What we haven't talked about was that farmers were growing more and more corn, wheat, and cotton and earning less and less money for it. In addition, farmers had purchased expensive equipment and had mortgaged their farms to pay for that new equipment, and now that they were earning less money, their debt levels were rising. With item number two, we've talked about the railroads charging high rates. We haven't talked about the banks charging high interest rates, and we'll get to that a little bit more specifically later in this lesson. The bottom line, though, is that farmers felt that the nation really was very unconcerned about their problems. The fact that farmers felt that the nation was ignoring their problems encouraged them to organize for themselves. As the cartoon shows here, the farmer doing battle with the evil monster train. Notice the train cars are actually wrapped in the back of the picture. The cars of the train are wrapped around the Capitol building where Congress meets, which would indicate that the train companies somehow had control of Congress. In this case, probably by bribing members of Congress to pass legislation that was favorable to the railroad monopolies at the time. The farmers organized first by forming the National Grange and Patrons of Husbandry, husbandry being farming. And you can see here that the Grange provided education on new farming techniques. It also had a political aspect to it. They were looking for governments, state and or federal governments, to regulate railroad rates, regulate grain elevator rates. And the Grange is actually going to be more successful in getting the farm states to pass laws regulating the railroad rates and grain elevator rates. You can see here the plain states are going to begin setting maximum rates for shipping and storing grain. The federal government is going to act also and form the Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate the railroads. And this is the very first time that the federal government is going to set up an agency to regulate a private industry. In part, that's because of the importance that railroads place to the nation. Farmers are not done organizing politically yet. As this map indicates, this map indicates the results of the 1892 presidential election. You can see the Democratic candidate Grover Cleveland won the states in blue. Republican candidate Benjamin Harrison won the states in red. There's a third candidate, the Populist Party candidate, in green. You notice They won several farm states. The farmers are going to create the Populist Political Party to organize for change at the federal level. If we take a look, the Populist Party platform had 5 different pieces to it. Number one, the coinage of silver to fight low prices. I'm going to talk about that more in a moment. Let's skip to the others for now. Item number 2, the Populist Party wanted direct government ownership of the railroads, and that was due in part to the very high prices that the railroads were charging the farmers to ship their crops. The Populist Party wanted a graduated income tax, meaning that the more you earned, the higher percentage of your income that you paid in tax. Item number 4, they wanted an 8-hour workday. And this was because the Populist Party is going to attempt to gain the factory workers as party supporters, because just having the farmers as party supporters was not going to be enough to win elections. So the Populist Party is going to try and combine the interests of farmers and factory workers together to form a national party. Hence the 8-hour workday that was for factory workers. Farmers usually work much longer than an 8-hour workday. Lastly, number 5, the direct election of senators. Senators at the time not elected by the people as they are today. They were chosen by the legislatures of the states, which were often very corrupt as well. Hence the United States Senate was corrupt. The picture we saw a moment ago of the train cars being wrapped around the Capitol building indicates the money that was spent on those senators to influence legislation. The Democratic Party is going to absorb the populist ideals in the election of 1896, and the Democrats are going to run populist candidate William Jennings Bryan for president in the 1896 election. He's not going to win, but you can see here the blue states are the states that Bryan won, and they are largely the poorer southern states and the poorer farm states. William McKinley, the Republican candidate, is going to win the election and wins the wealthier eastern states. This is in large part due to issue number 1, the coinage of free silver idea that was in item number 1 in the Populist Party platform. We need to have a quick little lesson about money and the way money works in order to understand the concept of free silver and its importance to the farmers in the 1890s. The money that you have in your pocket says Federal Reserve note on it. You can go and purchase things at the store with it, but you cannot take it to the bank and get $1's worth of gold or silver for your $1 bill in your pocket. It's what we call fiat money. The only reason the money in your pocket has value is because the government says that it does. All right? It is not tied to any precious metal. Back in the 1890s and prior, the nation was on what we call a gold standard, meaning that money was tied directly to the gold reserves of the federal government, which meant that the government could only print enough currency equal to the value of the gold reserves that it had, so that in theory, if everybody wanted to cash in their paper currency for the equivalent amount of gold that that currency was worth, the government would be able to do so. The problem with this system, as far as farmers were concerned, is that it limits the amount of money, of currency, that the government can print to the amount of gold it's got in its reserves. In the 1890s, there were large sections of the country that did not have printed currency in circulation, and farmers in these areas had to rely exclusively on credit and were at the mercy of the bankers to be able to borrow money. This was a position that they did not like. What farmers wanted was to have some of that silver that was coming out of all of those silver mines be turned into silver currency, increasing the amount of currency in circulation. This would have put us on a bimetallic standard where the government could use either gold or silver and have both in reserves. And there was a lot of silver coming out of the silver mines at the time. The downside to this idea, and bankers were not in favor of this idea, is that by increasing the amount of money in circulation, you are going to devalue the currency itself. In other words, you'll set off inflation. Prices will rise. A rise in prices are exactly what farmers wanted, because one, the prices they received for their crops would increase, and in addition, they would be paying those expensive loans back with cheaper dollars, meaning that it would be easier for the farmers to pay the loans back. The cartoon that you're looking at in front of you is anti-free silver cartoon, indicating that inflation would exist. If we take a close look here at the words on the page, it says Popocrats, nickname for the populists, and silver rights have forced me to make a dollar that is worth only 53 cents. The idea being that if the government starts minting a whole lot of silver coins, it's going to devalue the dollar to the point where it would only be worth, it would have the purchasing power of 53 cents, meaning, of course, the prices would go up significantly, which is exactly what we have in this section of the cartoon. The woman behind the counter saying, "I'm not to blame. I can't sell you a dollar worth for 53 cents. I've been obliged to raise the prices of my goods." And this would be due to inflation with the increasing amount of money in circulation. The farmer's saying that I'm only being paid what amounts to $1 per day instead of $2. Mr. Bryan said in his speeches times would be better and wages would be higher, but this don't look like it. Meaning, of course, even though his wages would be increasing, his purchasing power with those higher wages would not be increasing. So then, to sum up, farmers faced a number of problems, including low crop prices, high shipping rates from the railroads, high storage rates from the grain elevator companies. Farmers then began to organize. They formed the National Grange, they formed the Populist Party, looking to seek relief from both the state level and federal levels of government. Populist Party ideas were absorbed by the Democratic Party in 1896, and if I didn't mention before, they did not win the 1896 election. William Jennings Bryan lost to William McKinley. But the issues that the populists were pushing for, I indicated earlier in this lesson, a number of those issues are actually going to become law. The 8-hour workday, direct election of senators. We'll talk about those things in future lessons when they actually get passed into law. Farmers, however, are going to calm down a little bit. There was a depression in the 1890s, and by 1898, the nation is going to return again to economic prosperity. The government is going to increase regulations of the railroads. There will be more gold coming out of some of the gold mines, and all of this is going to ease the pressures that the farmers were facing. It's not going to eliminate them, though. We'll talk about that in a future unit.